All right, ladies and gentlemen, before the official opening of the IFLA World Congress, I would like to introduce free Congress lecture, particularly prepared by the organizing committee. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session. My name is Kim Yeonjin. I'm your MC today. The city of Gwangju, which hosts the 58th IFLA World Congress, carries a very important symbolic meaning to the Korean democracy. So, thus today's venue, Kim Dae-jung Convention Center. Professor Keunsik Jeong will render his lecture, Cold War Landscape in Transition, along with an introduction to the city of Gwangju and the Kim Dae-jung Convention Center. Mr. Jeong is serving as a chairperson of the TRC, and he is a professor of sociology at Seoul National University. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good morning, and everybody, and welcome to Gwangju, the historic city of democracy and human rights, and the beautiful garden city, famous for the mountain Mudong and the Yongsan River. I am so pleased to be able to share my idea for you, and especially my ideas on the Cold War landscape. Gwangju is not only famous for its citizens. Gwangju is famous historic city for the democratic movement in 1980 and the leading city of the Korean democratization and the transitional justice. And President Kim Dae-jung is a historic Korean hero of the Korean democracy and this change for democracy. His promise is still imprinted on the mind of many citizens, like the justice will flow like a river, freedom will bloom like wildflowers, and hope for unification will rise like a rainbow. A Korean transitional justice was revealed through the Gwangju Special Act enacted in 1995. The law laid the groundwork for punishing two former presidents who were responsible for military coup and civil killing. President Kim Dae-jung, who took office in 1998, established the legal basis for the Korean transitional justice. And Korea's transitional justice project is characterized by the triple transition that encompasses the decolonization and overcoming the war legacy as well as authoritarian rule. If the transitional justice deals with the human rights and human rights violation and the healing of victims committed by the authoritarian state power during the global Cold War, how should the environment and the landscape create at the same time is be dealt with? It's my main question. I have been thinking about how to conceptualize and theorize spatial landscape in the border area, including the DMZ in Korea, while looking at the landscape and the monuments observed in Okinawa, China's frontline confrontation, or the Germany and the Baltic countries. The topic that I am going to share with you today is the preservation and the dismantling of the landscape produced by the World Heritage and the Cold War, or the peaceful use of it. We will discuss the militarization of the border area, accessibility to the Cold War landscape, its component, reproducibility, and the future prospect. The Landscape is not only the ecological environment, but also psychological, aesthetic object captured by the eyes of those who look at it, as Henri Lefebvre and Jeong emphasized. The landscape is a complex being that encompasses not only the political dimension, but also the socio-cultural dimension, and is historically changing. The global Cold War created unique military landscape throughout the world, which can be called the Cold War landscape. The Cold War landscape developed along the border of the global Cold War, Germany, Eastern Europe, and East Asia, especially the divide countries, such as the both sides of the two Koreas or the China. Cold War scenes are observed not only on land, but also the sea and the river. The site of the military confrontation under the Cold War did not have the meaning of scenery because it was not accessible for citizens. As the Cold War eased, access to the state border or the national border, division border, became possible. And as the tourism developed, interest in the Cold War landscape increased and its value was confirmed. The border between the two Koreas was changed from 38 parallels to a truce line by the Korean War and the Armistice Agreement in 1953. The dividing line consists of the military demarcation line and the surrounding demilitarized zone, DMZ, and the DMZ is the area between the southern and the northern limit line, 2 kilometers north and south of the military demarcation line. The border between two Koreas consists of the demilitarized zone on land and the neutral zone at the Han River estuary and the NNL in the sea. Civilian access control zone has been established around the DMZ. The structure of the border like this. I think the starting point of the Cold War landscape is thought to be the legacy left by the Korean War. The Korean War was developed into a war of position where the front was fixed following the mobile war in which the front was extremely changed, and the damage to both cities and rural area was severe. Cities and villages were rebuilt after the war, but the ruins left by the war can be observed in the border. These two buildings of ruins is observed in the Cheonan area, old city in the mid-Korean peninsula. Cheonan is a represented city where it belonged to North Korea from 1945 to 1950, but became the part of the South Korea after the 1953. There are two landscapes here, a ruined pre-war city and the newly formed city after the war. In particular, the remains of the building left in the ruined old city of Cheonan and the unused railway became important elements of the Cold War landscape. The border, including the DMZ, gradually became militarized under the Cold War and became the site of the creation of the Cold War landscape. According to the Armistice Agreement, signs were erected on the military demarcation line and the guard posts were built on the southern limit line, but the boundary exists as a dot rather than a line. The United Nations commander set up a return line to the south of the demilitarized zone to particularly permit farmers to cultivation, but did not allow them to live. This has become a civilian control zone. The change in the barbed wire that forms the boundary is an indicator of this militarization. The Cuba crisis and the Vietnam War had a significant impact on the DMZ and the civilian control area. In particular, the North Koreans' military threats following the Vietnam War were key opportunity for the militarization of this border. In the mid-1960s, the Korean military installed wooden fences on the southern border and began to install steel fences with the barbed wire in 1968 or 9. Speakers for psychological warfare were also installed, and defensive concrete structure and dragon teeth were installed like this. In the west side of the Korean Peninsula, there are some islands. In Yeonpyeongdo, the dragon teeth has been built like this, 1974. I think this landscape is very particular, observed in Korean Peninsula and the Kinmen on the Mazu Island in the Taiwan. And the minefield was also established in this period. After the Cold, this DMZ zone has been changed, advancing fences and coming across two of the south and north GPs in DMZ like this. After the Korean War, the western part of the border was defended by the Allied forces and the eastern part by the Korean Army. Base villages developed around the United States military presence area. From 1968 to 1972, the Korean government created a strategic village for military and economic goal purposes in civilian control area to allow residents to reside. Base villages and strategic villages can be said to be a main component of the Korean Cold War landscape. In the early 1970s, the landscape of this base village changed as part of the United States military in Korea's Midwest border area, withdrew following the Nixon Doctrine. When the Inter-Korean Red Cross talks took place in 1972, the newly created strategic village was named Dongilcheon. The landscape of strategic village has been changed from 1960 to 1970s, like this. Main reason of this change is the psychological aspect. If journalist discussion is applied, the Cold War landscape is a combination of the specific physical environment that reveals the global Cold War and the observer's view and sense of it. Cold War scape include landscape and on land and seascape on the sea, visible objects on the ground as well as invisible underground remains or mines. In addition, the Cold War landscape is defined as covering what is heard as well as what is seen, so-called the sightscape and the soundscape. Cold War scape can be conceptualized, the more comprehensive concept to explain the Cold War landscape, I think. In the mid-1970s, when the Vietnam War ended, military tension on Korean Peninsula increased. The South Korean military found an underground tunnel in the border area, which was defined as a tangul for North Korean invasion of the South. This was actively used by the authoritarian government as a means of emphasizing all-out security campaign. The term tangul can be said to be a propaganda word that symbolized the enemy's military plot and ruse. The second tunnel, found in Cheron, the central region, combined with the unique scenery of the region, geographical environment, and scenery caused by volcanic activity centered on the Hantan River, served as an opportunity to establish the security tourism. When the Seoul Olympics were confirmed in the early 1980s, the central and the local government of Korea embodied security tourism plans. Some military posts with good views were converted into the observatory accessible to tourists, and the Cold War landscape began to be consumed as a tourism sources. The fence of the DMZ and the military guard post have been transformed into a symbolic place to protect national defense and the safety of the people. And the observatory overlooking DMZ and the North Korean area has been named as Observatory for Unification. In Korean name is the 통일 전망대. The security tourism was conducted with the political and social reconciliation event called the Family Reunion. In 1985, the first South-North separate family visit group was organized. There's so many elements make the Cold War landscape, like this, the broken railroad, or the restrict airface board, mine board, broken bridge. It's so many interesting sites make the comprehensive the Cold War landscape in Korea. Let me explain the visibility or the focus of the landscape, Cold War landscape. I think the military orientation and focus target in the Cold War landscape, like this, the military vision to capture the landscape, the surveillance, military, two military camp, also the main theme of the surveillance. From surveillance to the gaze by the tourists beyond the world. For example, the President Park Chung-hee visited Berlin 1964. The first event to see the beyond the wall, beyond the Berlin Wall, to see the East Germany and imagine the North Korean situation at the time. He said, like this, the tourist gaze is a desire to what? It's a very interesting question, I think. The observatory seeing the border and the beyond, longing for the parameter. In the Buddhist humor, the Buddhist word, peace or unification. There are so many observatories built in the border area. From the security tourism to peace tourism, some observatory changed name from Observatory for Unification to Observatory for Peace. Like this Cheron area, the Cheron Peace Observatory. So many people visit there and see through the window to the North Korean area. The left side, the right side is very interesting, very famous battlefield in Korean War. So many people see the North Korean scenery and imagine for the own desire. This is another observatory for the border, in the Gosang area. some guide explain the observatory and see the east side of the mountain Kumgang, very, very famous in Korean tourism. And nowadays, make the Peace Road along the side of the fence. The post-Cold War and the peace tourism with the global post-Cold War in the 1990s, democratization took place in Korea, and the possibility of inter-Korean dialogue increased. President Kim Dae-jung inauguration in 1998 had great significance in two contexts: democratization and the inter-Korean facilitation, and the tourism change. As military tensions eased along the inter-Korean border, the discovery of the remains of the dead, the reduction of a civilian control area, the establishment of the peace observatory, and the replacement of security tourism into peace tourism. In addition, the ecological value of the DMZ was re-evaluated, and the Cold War landscape began to be considered as an important cultural heritage. The Cold War landscape became a kind of the cultural heritage. This change was accelerated by the second Inter-Korean Summit in 2007, and the DMZ Museum was opened in 2009. The museum is very, very important in the history of the change of the Cold War landscape. In the museum, you can see all the comprehensive landscape in the building, and to objective viewpoint can be gained in the museum, I think. In the Cold War landscape research, accessibility and reproducibility are very, very important. The Cold War landscape in the border region was established as an important must-see by security tourism, but the representation of it was strictly limited for military reasons. The representation was limited to the animals and the plants in the DMZ, and in particular, the filming of migratory birds, including cranes, was a major channel for expanding the scope of the reproduction of the Cold War landscape. Photograph gradually began to target barbed wire posts and landmine signs for aesthetic reproduction as one detour. As security tourism has been converted to peaceful tourism, it has become possible to promote the Cold War landscape and take photos for promotion, like this. And the photographer, or the collection of photographs representing the Cold War landscape, as one example, famous photographer Park Jong-woo, DMZ. The book has been published in 2017 in Germany, not Korea. But after the 2 years later, this book can be published in Korea. It's very, very interesting book to study the landscape, Korean Cold War landscape. Like this, representation of Cold War landscape, forbidden, in this book, Forbidden Forest. In this book, also reconnaissance taken by this, and very, very famous photograph, guard post, South Korean guard post. This is North Korean guard post. Where is the guard post? It's difficult to find. The very, very small window can be seen in this photograph. And in the winter landscape, Cold War landscape, and so many obstacles in the Cold War landscape, and seascape on the river, Another book, Sang-bin, Dragon Teeth Across the Divided Land, has been published this year, like this. You can understand the comprehensive Cold War landscape by this book. Panmunjom served as the only window for United Nations and North Korean troops to contact. As a result, Panmunjom has become a very, very exceptional but symbolic place for the Cold War landscape, which is widely known internationally. The third Inter-Korean Summit and the first North Korean-United States Summit held at Panmunjom in 2018 amplified interest in the Cold War landscape. The scenery of Panmunjom, where the talks were held, was re-examined worldwide. An event to dismantle a large military post built in DMZ, and the joint project to excavate the remains of the dead were carried out. The GP evacuation event by the military negotiation and two exceptional cases preservation, two cases is a very, very interesting story. Preserved GP registration of cultural property 2019. Naming dispute. In this process, the naming dispute between Far Northern GP or Peace GP, Kumgang GP. Anyway, the remaining GP became a cultural property. Joint discovery operation in the middle front line, 화살머리 고지, Arrowhead Heights, the joint recovery operation 2019. And after this joint operation, we can make the peace, DMZ Peace Road. So many people can visit there, but nowadays stopped by the COVID-19 and military strain between two camps. If let me make a comprehensive table of my explanation like this: Cold War landscape in the South Korea, the three stages: militarization period, and security tourism period, and peace tourism period, and some variable: moment, subject, meaning, accessibility, tourism, goal, elements, glance, representation. The Cold War landscape is not only a physical presence, but is clearly a historical and social text. The Cold War landscape may be studied in the context of accessibility, component, and reproducibility, I think. It can be said that the Cold War landscape in Korea has changed significantly through three changes, as I said. What is the future? I think the transitional, if we apply my ideas to the theorization of the Cold War landscape, I think the transitional Cold War landscape is possible or not. Cold War landscape needs to be addressed as more comprehensive historical and social text. The Cold War landscape has been influenced by the global and domestic diverse variables. As I said, the three stages of the formation and the change of the Cold War landscape: militarization, security tourism, peace tourism. accessibility and the reproducibility are important to study on the Cold War landscape, as I focused. What's the future of the Cold War landscape? The Cold War landscape has been influenced by the global Cold War situation and various domestic variables in Korea. Especially, I think as the inter-Korean dialogue, as Korean inter-Korean summit dialogue progresses, interest tends to increase and its value tend to be emphasized. It is true that the Cold War landscape is gradually dismantling in accordance with the global post-Cold War on the one hand and under international developed pressures. But on the other hand, the demand to recognize it as a universal cultural heritage and register it as a cultural property cannot be ignored. With the current situation, where the post-Cold War is not enough and the possibility of a new Cold War is being discussed, the Cold War landscape is still shaken between hostility and peace, development and preservation, I think. Thank you.